Okay, so in the previous video I mentioned that if the valve didn't drop under its own weight, then you needed to polish the bore out. To do that, soak some 600 grit sandpaper in transmission fluid for about 30 minutes and then roll it up into a roll. Let it expand in the bore and then twist and pull in and out to polish it. So do this for a little bit, and then you need to now clean it thoroughly. I'm just using carburetor cleaner. So get all the little metal particulates out of there, and then dry it with compressed air. So now try the valve again, let it drop in there, and if it's not satisfactory, just do it again and keep doing it until it drops in and out really nice. So now I'm going to do that for every single valve, but I'm not going to show it just because it would be kind of boring. So right here, this is the lockup timing valve in the lockup valve body. So this video is just essentially me putting all the valve body and servo body components back together. Put the caps in the correct orientation and then clip them in. This is the lockup shift valve. Make sure the cap is in the correct orientation. You can check the service manual for this. It shows you what kind of caps go in which direction. This has a little pin. Just drive the pin through the valve body, through the cap to hold it in place. Now I can put my bolts back. Notice I laid them out in sort of the way they go into the valve body, so I can get the lengths correctly and put the feed pipe back in. And this guy's done. So next we have the regulator valve body, and this is the lockup control valve. Same deal. Put it in. Put the cap in the correct orientation, and then this one you have to drive the little pin through, hold it in place. Okay, this is going to be the regulator spring cap and the regulator valve. So the valve I put in first, and then I'm putting the regulator springs in, and then the cap on last. Now this is under a lot of pressure, so the way I did it was, well, first you have to loosen the little stop bolt there on the side. Loosen that up so that you can push it in all the way, and then I just used my body weight on the table and pushed it down, and while I was pushing it down, I tightened the bolt, and there we go. So I just tightened it finger tight. You could probably use a C-clamp as well now that I think about it, so you might want to try that out. It'll be a lot easier. So anyway, tighten the bolt, put the torque converter check valve and the cooler relief valve with their springs in this valve body, and then they got the little feed tubes, and then the bolt. Now this one's done. Moving on to the secondary valve body, we have the fourth exhaust valve. It's a little guy, putting it in the front, and then this has the little plate that goes in on the spring. Just hold the spring back with a screwdriver, slide the plate in. One thing you want to make sure is that the plate is completely covering the hole for the bore, and that it's centered really nice, and that notice how I'm pulling up on the valve to push the spring against that wall, that the little tab I just put in. All that's very important, especially making sure that it's centered on the bore. So next is the 3/4 orifice control valve, and got its own tab. This one again has the drive pin. Sorry, my head's in the way, kinda. This is the 3/4 shift valve. Slide it in there, and remember, I did the sandpaper polishing to any valve that was stuck. Put the cap in the correct orientation, and then put the little clip in to hold it. There we go. And lastly, for this valve body is the 2-3 shift valve. There's the cap. And there's the clip. And now we're going to put the feed pipes back in. And then the bolts. And then we're done with this guy. Now we have the main valve body. This is the servo control valve with the spring. So one thing I want to mention is that before I put all the valves into these valve bodies, I clean them thoroughly. That's that's just an important step to do, is to clean everything before you put it all back together. And notice how I'm doing this on these shop towels here. Oh, by the way, that was the relief valve. Don't want to miss a valve. Alright, so you see me centering them up on the bore right there, so it's very important. Anyway, it's important you clean these things and keep them clean as you're assembling them. Not put them on any dirty benches or anything like that. This is the modulator valve, I believe. It's got the clip little tab thing in the front. There we go. This is the CPB valve with the spring. Putting a little stop plate out front. Now we have the second orifice control valve. This should be the last valve on this valve body. Put the cap in, and then put the little clip. Oh, there's one more. I must have missed a valve. Not a huge deal. Okay, so now I'm cleaning the separating plate, and notice how it's kind of off color. That's because, and you'll see in a second, that you can see the blue discoloration around all the little holes. This actually looks pretty cool, I think. That means this thing overheated like crazy. So I'm going to need a new main separator plate. The other separator plates seem to be in pretty good shape, so I'm just going to clean the plates off. And also, like I said, I also cleaned the valve bodies by just spraying carb cleaner in them and using compressed air to dry them. Cleaning all the separating plates. That's a little filter, by the way. Okay, so now we are moving on to the servo body. This is the second accumulator piston. I'm just going to replace all the seals on this. So this size 2. Springs back on. Now we're going to move on to the first accumulator piston. And all these pistons, it's all the same deal. There's just 2 seals, one on each side, and just replace them. Not terribly complicated. So, putting these seals on. Spring. Next we have the 4th accumulator piston. Placing the seals on these. And then last we have the third accumulator piston. Same deal, 2 seals. So the rebuild kit that came with this had seals for many transmissions that Honda used in the same year. So just make sure you match the seals up with the correct ones. So now we have the servo valve shaft in the servo body. There's only 1 seal on this. Now we can put everything back together. We'll start with the servo valve shaft. This just slides right in, and make sure you lubricate everything just so it comes together really well. Now we're just gonna put each of the pistons in their bores, and this is the second accumulator piston. It has that little mark, that little cup there with the little snap ring in the middle. So this one I just pushed in with my finger with the snap ring, and then the snap ring just sort of expanded in its groove. And so this, I'm just checking to see if the snap ring is seated. You just always want to make sure that the snap ring is seated so it doesn't come out. So now these two they have a little bit tougher springs, so I decided to use a C-clamp and just lightly push in on the piston enough to get the snap ring in there. It made things so much easier. Just making sure the snap ring's seated, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the last one. And there we go. So everything looks good for this. Next we have the stator support shaft. There's 1 seal on this guy, and that's gonna be it for this video. Thanks for watching, guys. This one is the sun gear. They call it a planetary gear set because it has a center gear, and then it has little planet gears that go around.